Well, it's great to be in Australia again. It's really great to be in Australia at this time, as we hold the Ashes and we hold the Rugby World Cup. It's a very unique time. It'll probably never happen again, even if you invite me back. At the moment I can gloat, but it's, I don't know how long we'll hold the Ashes for, but there we are, never mind.
Not for long.
Not long, no. Not long, but there we go. It was a been some great cricket series over the year and some great rugby matches. But anyway, we have some great times around the word of the Lord, and they're more important, those things, aren't they? Those things are good fun. We need them for relaxation. What I'd like to do today and tomorrow is spend some time looking at Paul's predicaments. We know a lot about Paul's life, and probably much of what I say today and tomorrow you may not find very new. But I want to try and get into the mind of Paul and to try and get us to identify with this person. What was he like? What sort of things went through his mind when he found himself in certain predicaments? It's very easy for us to read the scriptures and to read right over these things that we take for granted, that we've known about them for a long time. I want us to stop and think about them. So, first of all, let's start off right from the beginning and ask ourselves, who is Paul? I suppose most of us know that he was a Jew. That he was born in Tarsus. That's a city right on basically the northeastern side of the Mediterranean. Really in southeast Turkey today. He obviously had wealthy parents, quite wealthy parents. He was from a very well-to-do family. They had a status as a Roman citizens. Nobody quite knows why they had Roman status citizens. Maybe because they were tent makers, they had made tents for the Roman army for years. And quite often, some Caesar or other could just grant somebody Roman citizenship. And they had Roman citizenship freely given them. And this was a great privilege and a great advantage too, as we know. He was sent to Jerusalem to complete his education. Now that cost quite a bit of money, because you had to pay for your keep. You probably had to pay a fee to the people who taught you. And he sat at the feet of Gamaliel. That was the highest honour that you could actually have at that time. It's like going to Oxford or Cambridge in England, or whichever our top universities are here. I mean, not only do you have to have wealthy parents, you have to be good. You have to be good. And so he had probably studied at Tarsus before he went there, got, in the synagogues there or whatever community was there, had got a higher claim, and Gamaliel was happy to teach him. Could we look at Acts chapter 22, verses 3 to 5? Sylvia will read it for us, please. So if you'd like to read Acts chapter 22, verses 3 to 5. This comes from.
Then Paul said, I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. Under Gamaliel, I was thoroughly trained in the law of our fathers and was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as also the high priest and all the council can testify. I even obtained letters from them to their brothers in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished.
Right, if you could also read for yourself Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 to 6, please.
Though I myself have reasons for such confidence. If anyone else thinks he has reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for legalistic righteousness, faultless.
Thank you. So that's a summary of himself. He's trying to put forward the qualifications that he has in the flesh as a human being in Judaism. He was circumcised on the 8th day as he should have been. He was of the people of Israel. He was of the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin and Judah were the tribes which made up the southern kingdom, and these were the two faithful tribes. They didn't desert the temple, they didn't desert the Lord. There was no flaw in his pedigree at all. There was nothing you could point the finger at. He was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Like we talk about King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. He was the top Hebrew, one of the top ones you could actually have. In regard to a law, he was a Pharisee. And some experts say that the Pharisees were in two groups. One was a bit more lax than the other. The other was a particularly very strict group. And Paul belonged to that group, they suggest. And as for zeal, if you want to know what my zeal was like, if you want to know what my enthusiasm was like for Judaism, I was prepared to persecute the church. And as for legalistic righteousness, I was faultless, said Paul. Now, you could think this guy was boasting, because I've taken the quote out of context. But if you read the context of Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 to 6, he's going to say, all this I count as nothing. Right? So this isn't a boast. This is a description of himself. So when he says, as for legalistic righteousness, I'm faultless, I believe him. I don't think that was an idle boast. You would not have found a better Jew than Paul. You would not have found a better Pharisee than Paul. This was what this man was like. He was the top dog. There's no doubt about that. But what's Paul's first appearances on the pages of Scripture? His first appearances on the pages of Scripture come in Acts chapter 7, verses 58 onwards. And I'll read that to you. This follows the arrest of Stephen and Stephen's outburst against the leaders, the Jewish leaders. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. This time, Paul still had his Jewish name, and he was called Saul. It was later changed to Paul. And Saul was there giving approval to his death. In other words, the people there dragged Stephen out, they wanted to stone him, and they looked to Saul, to Paul, and said, is this okay? Yeah, he says, go on, do it, do it. He didn't actually pick up a stone himself. He didn't soil his hands, but he gave his approval. And on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Notice how strong that word is. As for zealousness, he said, I had high zealousness. I tried to destroy the church because I thought they were wrong. They were going against the traditions of our fathers. They were going right against the teachings of the Pharisees. They were going against how he understood the law of Moses and the prophets. Therefore, they were a corrupt sect. These Christians were corrupt. Therefore, they need to be destroyed. And going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. Not a very nice person, you think? Well, it depends which angle you look at it from. We look at it from a historic point of view, but if you were many Jews at that time, you'd have been applauding him, thinking, what a good guy. Isn't he dedicated? Isn't he committed? Absolutely wonderful. Anyway, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. And it seems that he had done such a good job in Jerusalem that everyone had gone. There was just the apostles there, and they were probably in hiding. So what does he do now? What does he do now? Well, eventually, and I say eventually, and I'll explain why I say eventually in a moment, he went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Now, why Damascus, if you think about it? I mean, Damascus is about, well, if you go from Jerusalem to Nazareth, you know, if you think about the journey that Mary and Joseph had to come from Nazareth down to Bethlehem, that would probably take 10 days. So travelling all the way up to Damascus would probably take 3 weeks. It was a 3-week journey. They didn't travel very far in those days. I was surprised when I heard that the average time that if they were moving an army, they would travel 10 miles a day. 10 miles a day to move an army. That's what they would do. They could go faster. I mean, if there was an emergency and a route march, oh yes, they could go a lot faster. But in general terms, if you're moving an army from point A to point B, you did 10 miles a day. Very hot out there, very humid out there. He wanted to go all the way to Damascus. Had some news come from Damascus to him? Why Damascus? Well, I've often wondered that because I looked, if you look about the day of Pentecost, there were Jews and proselytes from all over these different cities and countries. But he doesn't mention Damascus or Syria. But obviously he must have known that there were quite a number of Christians in Damascus. So he decided, I'm going to Damascus. But we must note something else here. And that's why I say he probably eventually went to the high priest to get the letters for Damascus. Because I think between the stoning of Stephen and going to Damascus, there was a period of time in which Paul did lots of other things, which we know very little about. Lots of other hostilities towards the church. He says in Acts chapter 26, verses 9 to 11, I, Paul, too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And again, you have to stop and think about this man. This person, Jesus of Nazareth, said that he could forgive sins. Only God can forgive sins. This person, Jesus of Nazareth, claimed that he was the Messiah. This person, Jesus of Nazareth, claimed he was the Son of God. That's all blasphemy. That is all blasphemy, unless of course he is. So any Jew that did not believe in Jesus would naturally want to do what Paul wanted to do. And that's why he wanted to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is just what I did in Jerusalem, he said. And he was very successful at it. As we said, everybody fled Jerusalem. All the Christians fled Jerusalem apart from the apostles. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the saints in prison. And they were put to death. We only read in Acts about the stoning of Stephen. Many people miss this passage, read over this passage in Acts chapter 26. He put many of them to death. I cast my vote against them, he said. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished. How many, there's a whole bunch of activity here that we don't have in the right, round about that Acts chapter 7 period. Stacks of stuff that he was doing. And I tried to force them to blaspheme. Well, of course, now he's a Christian and he's talking about the way he tried to get the Christians to blaspheme was to deny that Jesus was the Messiah, that he was the Son of God. In my obsession against them, I even went to, and notice this, foreign cities. Damascus wasn't the first place he went to. Damascus wasn't the first foreign city Paul went to. So when we read, going back to Acts chapter 9, meanwhile Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples, and I put in there, eventually he went to the high priest and asked for letters for the synagogues in Damascus. Because in Acts chapter 26, verses 9 to 11, he'd done a whole mass of persecuting, going from synagogue to synagogue, from town to town, even to foreign cities, that's cities outside of Judea. And I don't know which ones they are. I have no idea. If you said to me, well, which ones did he go to? I haven't got a clue. He doesn't tell us. But he does say he went to foreign cities. There's an S on the end, that's plural. We only know about the Damascus one. Now, why do we know about the Damascus one? Well, for pretty good reasons, I suspect, that we know about the Damascus one, as we will come to it. Because he set off for Damascus. As he neared Damascus, well, what had happened to him? Well, he'd seen the stoning of Stephen. He'd given his approval to it. He'd persecuted lots of other people, had them imprisoned, had lots of others put to death. He'd gone from synagogue to synagogue. He'd gone off to foreign cities. And now he's had a 3-week journey approximately to Damascus. I wonder what he thought about on that 3-week journey to Damascus. I mean, did he ever stop to have a conscience about the number of people he was killing? The number of people he was imprisoning? Did he reflect on it? I wonder if he thought more about why these people were prepared to put their lives at stake for this Jesus of Nazareth. Why for this Galilean were they prepared to go to prison? Were they prepared to be beaten? Were they prepared to be stoned to death? What did he think of in those 3 weeks? I don't know. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men travelling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Now I wonder what he thought about in those 3 days. I suspect what he thought about in those 3 days were totally different to what he thought about in the previous 3 weeks on his journey. He probably did think about the number of people that he had imprisoned on a 3-week journey. I bet he thought about the number of people he'd imprisoned during those 3 days. He certainly thought about the number of people he'd had put to death on that 3-week journey. I bet he thought about them again in those 3 days. Certainly on the way up, I bet he did think about Jesus of Nazareth and these preposterous claims to be the Messiah, the Son of God, and to forgive his sins. And I bet he thought about Jesus of Nazareth again during those 3 days. But his thoughts must have been totally different. 3 days he was blind. What happened in those 3 days? Did God speak to him again? What did he think about? Should I go back to Jerusalem? Should he go back to Tarsus? What's he going to do now? Things have changed. How will he get there? He's blind. Did he reflect on what he'd done to the Christians? What was he going to do now that everything had changed? Anyway, he gets there, and after 3 days, something else happens. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. "Ananias?" "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." So during that 3 days that he was blind, the Lord had given him a vision. And the vision was that somebody called Ananias was going to come and lay his hands on him and he would regain his sight. I expect he was very pleased about that, but mildly. Then I find this was the most incredible statement. I am often amazed by this statement. "Lord," Ananias said, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name." Ananias seems to tell the Lord this, assuming the Lord doesn't know anything about it. And I sometimes think that one of my prayers, sometimes in some of my prayers, I'm a bit like that, saying to the Lord, thinking that he knows, what am I rabbiting on like this for, Lord? You know it all together. Anyway, the Lord said to Ananias, quite simply, go. This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. Now we have to be very careful. We tend to emphasize Paul as an apostle to the Gentiles. We have to be very careful with that title, and we'll deal with this maybe in the next talk, I think it is. Because he's told he's going to go to the Gentiles, he's going to go to their kings, but he's also going to go to the people of Israel. And I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. So, I want you to go and lay hands on this person. He's my chosen vessel. I'm going to send him to the Gentiles. He's going to go to their kings. He's going to go to the people of Israel. And before I send him, I'm going to show him how much he must suffer for my name. Now, I haven't suffered much as a Christian, but I have suffered. Nothing compared to Paul. And I've often stopped and wondered and thought, if right at the beginning, when I first became a Christian, if the Lord had said to me, hang on a minute now, just before you sign the dotted line, I'm going to show you all the problems you will have as a Christian, because you're a Christian. I mean, I've had lots of problems in my life which had nothing to do with being a Christian. I'm not talking about those. And I'm certain Paul had lots of problems in his life which had nothing to do with suffering in the name of the Lord. But if the Lord had been able to isolate to me and say, right, these are the things that are going to happen to you because you're a Christian, I wonder if I'd signed on the dotted line. Salutary thought, isn't it? Anyway, what he showed Paul was far, goodness knows. So the questions we have. When did the Lord show Paul these things? And from our point of view, from a human point of view, what was Paul's reaction? What was Paul's reaction? In Acts chapter 26, verses 15 to 18, let's see what we have there. This is Paul reiterating what actually happened on the Damascus road. Gives us a bit more details in this account. Who are you, Lord, he says. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, the Lord said. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen of me and what I will show you. What had Paul seen of Jesus up to that point in time? I don't know. What was the Lord going to show him? Well, he's going to show him lots of different things. We know that. And we'll look at some of them over the weekend. I will rescue you from your own people. I'm going to rescue you from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place amongst those who are sanctified by faith in me. You're going to go to the Gentiles. They're going to receive forgiveness of sins and they're going to be sanctified. And they're going to be placed amongst, if you like, the people of Israel who already believe in me. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. So let's look at Acts chapter 26, verse 19. This is what Paul says on another account. So then, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient. And we know that. To the vision from heaven. The vision from heaven told him he was going to go to the Gentiles. He was going to go to the kings. He was going to go to the people of Israel. He would suffer many things for the Lord's name. And the Lord would rescue him from his own people and rescue them from the Gentiles. Now, we know a lot about Paul's life. We know the times he was shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, tortured. The Lord showed him what was to happen to him, and he was not disobedient. I find Paul an amazing man. I really find Paul an amazing man. Because if the Lord had shown me that lot, I would have said, no, thank you. I couldn't take that. I could not take that. Paul said I was not disobedient. So, what did Paul do? Where did he go? What time's coffee?
Lunch is at 1 o'clock.
You want me to go until 1 o'clock?
No, a quarter to 1 will do.
About quarter to 1 will do. Okay. Anyway, if anybody got any comments or questions up to this point in time, let's try and keep it chronological. So don't ask anything about things that you know is going to happen. If anybody got any comments,